Welcome to our course, Managing Emotions During Times of Uncertainty and Stress. My name is Mark Brackett. I am a professor at Yale University, the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and author of Permission to Feel. I have the honor of being your co-instructor for this course, along with my colleagues Diana DeVecha, Nikki Albertson, Jessica Hoffman, Susan Riello, and Robin Stern. Take a moment and just think about the last number of months. How have you been feeling? Really, how have you been feeling? What we know is that our lives have been a roller coaster ride of emotions. And what research shows is that our feelings and emotions matter a great deal for everything in life, from our attention, to our memory, to everyday learning, to decision making, to the quality of our relationships, our physical and our mental health, our creativity, and our academic and workplace performance. But there's hope. Researchers and practitioners over the last couple of decades have spent an enormous amount of time developing strategies and tools and resources to help us all manage our emotions, and stress in particular, more effectively. This course will help you develop a deeper understanding of the science, the neurobiology, the psychology of stress, as well as help you develop the skills that you need to support your own health and well-being and support other people in achieving theirs. The first half of the course is designed specifically to support you in building a more advanced emotion vocabulary, for you to learn more evidence-based strategies to support you in supporting your health and wellness. And then the second half of the course is designed to help you support others, especially students, in labeling their feelings and managing their emotions effectively. Throughout the entire course, there'll be opportunities to develop personal action plans so that you can apply these skills directly and immediately to your everyday lives. Lastly, I just want to extend my gratitude to everyone, to the scientists, to the practitioners, to all of my colleagues who have put enormous time into building this course. And finally, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you, because without you, we would not be able to create a healthier, more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. So with that, let's begin.
We're all experiencing a range of emotions right now. Life is an emotional roller coaster, now more than ever. COVID-19 has had an unprecedented impact on educators, school staff, students, and families. As the 2019-2020 school year came to a close, we asked over 5,000 school staff members how they were feeling. Their answers included words like anxiety, stressed, nervous, lonely, overwhelmed, frustrated, concerned, and confused. Around the same time, at the end of the 2019-2020 academic year, we held a webinar for over 1,000 adults focused on helping children manage their emotions during this time. We asked these attendees how their children and students were feeling. These answers included frustrated, worried, confused, bored, lonely, angry, sad, disappointed, and we did have a few responses like happy, playful, and loved. All of these emotions that we're experiencing come from real events that are happening in our world. We experience strong emotions when things in our environment trigger these emotions, which isn't always a bad thing. Our response to these events and emotions, and in particular our stress response, is our body's way of helping us adapt to threats in our environment. While it may feel unpleasant, this response has helped us to survive for millions of years. But when we feel stress or anxiety over a long period of time, it can have a negative impact on our health, relationships, and our ability to be present, teach, work, and learn. Anxiety can make us play things over and over in our heads and crave control. And when we are anxious, we often think that nothing is going to work out. The hopeful news is that researchers have been studying these emotions for decades. Practitioners have transformed those findings into strategies, routines, and habits that help people cope with these ranges of emotions, in particular stress and uncertainty. These practices have been formalized into what we now know as social and emotional learning, and the strategies presented in this course are informed by the field of SEL. Social emotional learning, or SEL, is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions, according to Castle. SEL also can provide us with the necessary skills to cope with situations that may or may not be within our control. For example, in unjust or unfair situations, people who are skilled in SEL might leverage their anger in constructive ways. They might channel their anger into passion for educating others, pushing for change, seeking allies, fighting for justice, or volunteering to support a cause. To cope with the wide range of emotions surrounding the COVID-19 crisis, those who are skilled in SEL may find ways to express empathy, amplify people's positive experiences and emotions, express gratitude, and connect to others to seek and provide support. Importantly, even though SEL involves managing our emotions, it isn't about control, subordination, or conforming. It's about finding our truth and navigating emotions effectively, leading us to finding productive ways to achieve our goals, support others, and attain well-being. The most effective SEL is systemic. This means that it's embedded into the pre-K to 12 curricula and instruction, school-wide practices and policies, and family and community partnerships. As we continue throughout this course, we'll learn how SEL can help us deal with all of the different emotions that we're experiencing right now.
At the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, we talk a lot about why emotions matter, and there are 5 critical reasons. The first is attention, memory, and learning. Let's face it, over the last 6 or so months, we've experienced a lot of unpleasant feelings, from anxiety to stress to frustration to anger to boredom to loneliness. And what we know from research is that for both children and adults, when we experience a lot of strong, unpleasant emotions, we go into survival mode, not teaching and learning mode. As a matter of fact, what we know is that we go into that fight, flight, or freeze response. Maybe you can relate to that. We don't go into, oh, let me learn something new mode. As a matter of fact, the areas of our brain responsible for taking in information literally get cut off when we're experiencing these high levels of stress. Importantly, moderate levels of stress are okay. That stress associated with trying to learn something new or playing a new game, that's all the good stress. Unfortunately, what I'm talking about here is that bad stress. Many of our students are going to be coming back to school looking distracted, being overwhelmed and frustrated, and it may look like they have even learning problems. But the point I want to make here is that it just might be that they've had so much stress that hasn't been managed that it's manifesting itself in what appears to be a learning difference. Also, what's really cool is that other emotions are very helpful for learning. By way of example, when we experience inspiration and curiosity, literally the areas of our brain responsible for thriving and surviving light up. So what's the message here? I think there are 3. The first is that we have to manage stress, our own and our students, effectively. The second is that we have to create learning environments for both adults and children, where we feel a sense of safety and security and connectedness and belongingness. And third, we have to create as many opportunities as possible for ourselves and for our students to experience that inspiration and curiosity. The second way emotions matter is with decision making. We like to think of ourselves as rational beings, that we're in total control over our judgments and choices in life. But the truth is, how we feel very much influences our choices and decisions. Take, for example, you've had a really rough morning, you didn't sleep well, you're kind of irritable, maybe you had a fight at home, and then you're at work. And someone asks you to do something, and you're like, no, I can't do that. Or they ask your opinion about something, and you say something like, I don't think it's that great. What we don't realize is that that choice or that judgment in that moment likely had something to do with how we felt, that morning. This happens with positive emotions. It happens with negative emotions. So, for example, when we're in a very sad mood, we tend to look at a task and we're like, oh, it's going to be really difficult. When we're in a very positive mood, we're like, not a problem. That's easy. One way to get more skilled in this area is to just check in with your feelings. So in between work and home or home and work, you just take that moment and pause and just say, how am I feeling right now? And what we know from research is that when we attribute our feeling to its actual cause, it's less likely to have influence over the subsequent choice or decision. The third reason why emotions matter is that they influence the quality of our relationships. In our center, we like to talk about emotions as signals to approach or avoid. This occurs for our own experience of emotion, right? You ever wake up and you're kind of frustrated or overwhelmed and you're like, oh, I don't really want to engage with people today. Other days you wake up and the sun is shining and you're having just an unpleasant mood and you're like, I want to talk to everybody I know. Also, what's interesting about emotions is that we're observing the world around us every day. We're noticing people's facial expressions, body language, vocal tones. And what we know from research is that people who display a lot of negative emotions, they're sending signals. What are they saying? They're saying, stay away. I may not respect you. I don't really want to engage with you. On the other hand, people who display more pleasant emotions, what are they saying? I'm here for you. Yeah, come talk. I'm approachable. Importantly, when it comes to our students, they may be displaying a lot of negative emotions because of their difficult circumstances over the last couple of months. They may act out, they may look overwhelmed, and they may be anxious, and maybe they're behaving in ways that are uncomfortable to us. But my hope is that you'll see that as a signal to approach, because what's probably underneath that behavior is a need that is not met. Lastly, what I'd like to offer you is a little exercise. Over the next couple of weeks, take a moment and just think about the different people that you work with and write their names down. And just jot down the first feeling that comes to mind around that person. And ask yourself, does that feeling influence the way I treat that person, the way I greet that person, the way I interact with that person? And what that exercise can do is it can just build greater self-awareness about the quality of our relationships. The fourth reason why emotions matter is that they influence our physical and our mental health. Take stress, for example. There is a continuum of stress, from no stress at all when you're at ease and you're calm, when you're tranquil and you're peaceful, to positive stress, for example, when you're under pressure to perform at your best or when you're being challenged. And then there's distress. There's acute distress, which is a momentary distress. There is chronic stress. And then there's toxic stress, which happens when we experience stressors for a very long, prolonged period of time, and it's high intensity. And as you can imagine, the greater the toxic stress, the worse off our physical and mental health can be. What's interesting about this research also is that our mindsets around stress can influence our physical and mental health. For example, a colleague of mine did research where she had people watch videos. They were videos of people doing really intense sports. One group watched the videos and said, oh my goodness, that stress has got to be harmful for people. The other group were like, wow, look how stress is enhancing their performance. 4 weeks later, people were tested. And interestingly enough, those who were in the bad stress condition had worse physical and mental health symptoms. In our work with teachers, what we know is that the culture and climate of schools literally influences the stress levels. We've all experienced that, right? To, importantly, those stress levels influencing things like stress-related absences, burnout, even anxiety and depression. So think about that. Our organizational climates directly affect our feelings, which in turn influence our health, and it all works in a circle. Finally, interesting research shows that our experience of more pleasant emotions can buffer against the negative impact of stress. In this one classic study after September 11th, college students who experienced more gratitude, who experienced more pleasant emotions post the 9/11 attacks, 5 weeks later, had less depressive symptoms. So the message here is that we have to learn how to manage our stress carefully. We have to be careful about our mindset around stress, and we have to find a way to have greater balance of pleasant to unpleasant emotions. The fifth reason why emotions matter is that they influence our everyday creativity and performance. What we say in the Center for Emotional Intelligence is that emotions are the fuel of our creative process, but it's our emotion skills that determine whether or not we literally create the product. We've all had students, most of whom have all the cognitive capabilities to achieve their dreams. But why is it that they don't all achieve that dream? What we find is that they don't know how to deal with the disappointment at an unmet expectation, the frustration at a project not going well, the anxiety around their performance, the inability to deal with difficult feedback. So, what we know is that people who have the skills to manage their feelings are more likely to achieve their dreams. The mood meters are a tool to help us build better self-awareness, even language for emotion. On the x-axis, it says the word pleasantness. Think about it. Every morning we wake up and we think to ourselves, this is going to be a great day, or, ooh, I wish I could pull the covers over my head. That's pleasantness. We want to approach, we want to avoid. We feel pleasant, we feel unpleasant. On the y-axis, it says the word energy. Energy has to do with both your physical and your mental energy. Think about it. You wake up in the morning, you feel energized, or you just feel depleted of your resources, tired and exhausted. What we do to create the mood meter is we cross pleasantness and energy, and that creates the 4 quadrants: yellow, red, blue, and green. Each of the quadrants represents different emotions. Let's take yellow. High energy, pleasantness. Happy, excited, optimistic, joyful, elated, even ecstatic. Let's go to the green. It's still pleasant, but it's lower in energy. Calm, content, tranquil, peaceful, relaxed, at ease. The blue and the red quadrants are unpleasant feelings. Remember, unpleasant doesn't mean negative. Unpleasant doesn't mean bad. It just means they don't feel pleasant on the inside. And the red quadrant is our quadrant that represents words like anger, anxiety, among their different intensities. So you can go from peeved to angry to enraged, or from uneasy to worried to anxious to overwhelmed. Finally, the blue quadrant represents emotions like sadness, loneliness, despair, even deep depression. Those are the 4 quadrants of the mood meter, and what they're helpful for is just taking everything that's going inside your head and putting it out into these 4 quadrants. It allows us to take our complex inner lives, our feelings, and just say from the beginning, am I in the yellow, red, blue, or green? And you might even ask yourself, why am I feeling that way? And then in turn, try to find the best possible word to describe your feeling.
Our emotions are rooted in our life experiences. While there are global causes of emotions, for example, anger being about a perceived injustice, what makes one person feel anger might not make another person feel the same way. Consider some of the things that make you feel calm and safe. Are those the same things or different than what makes your partner or a colleague feel calm and safe? Now think about the children or students in your life. What makes them feel calm and safe? What differences or similarities exist with the causes you listed for yourself? Similarly, the same situation or event may cause one person to feel one way and another person to feel another way. For example, a thunderstorm may be exciting to a child who loves to tell ghost stories, but anxiety-provoking to another child who's sensitive to loud noise. Another example might be when a car is following too closely on the road, honking and flashing their lights. It might make one person angry, while making another driver anxious that perhaps they're going too slow or doing something wrong. These differences may be rooted in our temperament or adult personality traits, like whether we're easily activated or even-keeled, prone to worrying or getting angry quickly. Other times, it might be due to past experiences. Cultural differences also play a large role in our experience of emotion. Some cultures have more words than others for different emotions, while other cultures have no words for some emotions. Also, cultural norms, beliefs, and values can influence what might cause someone to feel the way that they do. For example, eye contact in one culture can be a sign of respect, but disrespectful in another culture. We also may make assumptions and have blind spots in regard to people's feelings. Research shows that we tend to assume that what causes us to feel certain emotions also causes others to experience those same emotions. We also naturally tend to assume that others feel the same way that we do about the same things. Pausing to learn what someone's actually feeling and why they feel the way they do reduces misunderstanding and increases accuracy. To practice this skill, think about a relationship that you care about or one that you might be struggling with. Consider the emotions of frustration and joy. List or consider a few things that make you feel frustrated, then a few things that you believe make the other person feel frustrated. Try the same thing for joy. What do you notice? How many similarities and differences were there? With the right words, we can communicate our emotions more clearly to our coworkers, students, and their families, but also to our own friends and loved ones. When we can identify specifically what we're feeling, we're also in a better place to do something about it. To find the right words to communicate our feelings, we can use the following steps. Consider how pleasant the feeling is. Then consider its level of energy. Plot it on the mood meter. Consider what may be causing the feeling. Then try to find a specific word. Our feelings come with us to work. Despite our best efforts and good intentions to show up for our students and colleagues, we simply can't leave our emotions at the door. When we try, they tend to leak out or leave us drained from the effort of showing a different feeling on the outside than we're experiencing on the inside. So what do educators' emotions have to do with our students? As we've seen so far in this course, our feelings affect our judgment. They impact how we perceive situations and how we understand others' behaviors. Our feelings give us a window into why we connect more easily with some students than others, and why we may be drawn to support students that seem more like us. Awareness of such natural biases is the first step toward mitigating these effects. Next, we know that emotions impact how we communicate and teach. Emotions are contagious. A passionate teacher can inspire their students, while a distracted teacher may struggle with keeping students engaged. To stay aware of how we're feeling, we can ask ourselves if our emotional state is helpful to our current situation, and if not, work on shifting our emotions to be in the most effective emotional place to perform in our jobs. Finally, we're the models of emotional intelligence for our students. This begins with setting the climate in our classrooms and schools. Students will define themselves inside of the emotional space that we create, for both our classrooms and in our relationships with them. Modeling also means monitoring our own biases so that we can see the other person clearly for who they are and what's going on with them, rather than as mirrors of ourselves or projecting our own emotions onto them. It's a step toward meeting our own needs in a healthy way, not making students meet our needs. Teachers who model emotional intelligence are also comfortable showing their students how to identify and manage emotions. For example, after getting some sad news that a colleague is ill, we might say to our students something like, I'm a little distracted right now because I just got some sad news. I wanted to let you all know that I have that going on, but I'm going to do my best to be present with you during this lesson. One way I'll do that is by reminding myself how lucky I am that I get to see you all today. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean being happy all of the time. It means understanding our own and others' emotions and their value. For example, when thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic, we realized that we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Perhaps you have ample childcare or don't have children in your home. Your school has selected a plan that makes you feel safe, and you don't have family members who are sick or at risk. Yet daily, coworkers and students you interact with are struggling. How do you balance your own comfort with empathy for others? Or you may be struggling with these areas and have difficulty understanding why others seem to have it so easy during such a challenging time. Remember, classrooms and schools are places with many interpersonal dynamics at play. Race, religion, culture, gender identity, and socioeconomic status all influence the way people experience situations, how they feel, and how those feelings are expressed and understood, and sometimes misunderstood. It's our obligation to be aware of these differences. For example, how the distribution of power and authority shapes our interactions. The sum of these interactions and how they are experienced forge identities and can lead us to us and other categorizations, labeling, and stereotyping. As educators, it's our job to not be complicit in this and to actively avoid these stumbling blocks. Mapping out the differences in each of our relationships is a process. Doing so can help us determine where identities overlap and how bonds can be developed despite them, bonds that are stronger and more conducive to the shared mission of teaching and learning. Wherever you are in the process, it has to involve questioning our initial interpretations of, and reactions to, others' emotions, to ask about their feelings, be honest about our own, and be willing to try to understand the circumstances. In the first section of this course, we shared how school staff said they were feeling at the end of the unprecedented 2019-2020 school year. Most of them said anxious, stressed, and worried. However, even before COVID-19, school staff reported experiencing unpleasant emotions regularly. During the 2017-2018 school year, stressed, frustrated, and overwhelmed were the most commonly reported feeling words, among a mix of other unpleasant and pleasant emotions. It's clear that how we want to feel is different than how we actually feel. We say we want to feel excited, safe, confident, and happy, but in reality, many of us have felt stressed, frustrated, and overwhelmed for years. Some unpleasant feelings are inevitable and even useful, but what's wrong here is how out of balance we are. Unfortunately, 70% of the emotions adults have been feeling have been in the red and blue mood meter quadrants, which are the unpleasant emotions. A reasonable goal would be to flip these ratios so that we're spending 70% of the time in yellow and green quadrants experiencing pleasant emotions and about 30% of the time in the blue and red quadrants. As we've said, some unpleasant emotions are inevitable and helpful, but over time, especially when they're strong, they can take a toll on our health and our well-being. So why is it so hard to get our emotional lives in balance? The reality is that our bodies are responding to the physical threats before us, which is natural. Our bodies are trying to keep us safe by ringing our alarm bells. There are two parts of our brains really at work here. The first is the limbic region, which is deep in the middle of the brain. The limbic region is like an air traffic controller, scanning for an incoming threat. It monitors information that comes in from our senses, like what we see and hear, as well as our memories and thoughts. The main job of the limbic system is to keep our body safe from danger. It's in charge of releasing the neurotransmitters and hormones that move energy to different parts of our bodies for fight, flight, and freeze. Memories of scary events are also stored here in the hopes of protecting us from similar events in the future. The second area involved is the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of our brain that thinks, reasons, plans, and analyzes situations. We can think of it as the executive manager of our thoughts that helps us to see the big picture and have perspective. These neural connections between the limbic region and the prefrontal cortex grow over the course of our childhood and take about 25 years to fully establish. These connections are what allow our feelings to inform our thoughts. The connectivity between the two regions also makes it possible for us to use our thoughts to help us manage our emotions. But when we're highly stressed, the limbic region takes over and turns on all the alarms to help us survive. The access to the prefrontal cortex shuts down, which is why it's hard to think clearly, to learn, or to pay attention to anything else when we're stressed. When we're feeling stressed, the sensory system also goes on full alert, meaning that vision and hearing lock onto the threat. The limbic region sends messages to the adrenal glands to release adrenaline, which activates the heart and lungs, preparing us for fight or flight. The stress hormone cortisol is released, which starts breaking down fats and proteins for energy. It also stores the memory of the scary event and its context in our brains. Body functions that are not essential for responding to danger, like the immune response and digestion, are also slowed down. Once the threat has passed, the body restores its balance and functioning again. However, repeated or prolonged stress eventually causes wear and tear on these functions. This is why experiencing long-term adversity can cause problems like immune disorders, high blood pressure, heart problems, and metabolic problems. This sounds scary, but the good news is that understanding the stress response also gives us clues for how to manage it in the best way possible. Again, too many unpleasant emotions experienced for long periods of time, which are natural results of stressful and uncertain times, can have negative effects on our physical and mental health, our relationships, and our performance in and out of school. While the goal isn't to experience pleasant emotions all of the time, we do often need greater balance, and we need strategies that work for us to get there. Managing our emotions means how we deal with our emotions. It involves checking in with how we're feeling and asking if we want to continue feeling that way or shift to a different feeling. Strategies for managing emotions include action strategies, which are things that we can do, and thought strategies, which are things that we can think about or say to ourselves. Action strategies might include things like taking a deep breath or talking to a friend. Thought strategies may include saying something positive to ourselves or trying to reframe a situation to see it from a new perspective. We've all been managing our emotions from birth, like when we cried to get emotional support from our family members. Still, many of us go through much of our lives using emotion management strategies haphazardly, without much conscious thought. We reach for that pint of ice cream or video game console when we're sad, or avoid people or places that bring back uncomfortable memories for us. Managing our emotions well is about becoming more consistent with our strategies, paying careful attention to the ones that work for us and help us to grow, to the ones that help us to develop and maintain healthy relationships, and to those strategies that help us achieve greater well-being and support the goals that we set for ourselves. Consistent use of helpful strategies not only sets us up to feel better, but also to be better able to deal with challenging feelings when they arise. When we eat and sleep well, move our bodies each day, have a strong social network in place, and have goals and meaningful work, we tend to be in a better place to manage annoyances, frustrations, and other stressors in helpful ways. These proactive strategies are like building the foundation of a house. When we have a solid foundation for our physical and mental health in place, we're better able to weather the storm. One of the first strategies is breathing. With more oxygen, the chemistry of our brain changes, blocking the effects of stress or excitement that shut down our ability to think clearly. Slow, deep breaths relax the body and mind, helping us to feel calmer and begin to problem solve. The most helpful way to do this is to breathe slowly and intentionally, which is a practice called mindful breathing. People often think that mindful breathing is a religious practice, but everyone breathes, regardless of their religious affiliation. Mindful breathing simply means being intentional about something we all do, which is breathe. There's also a misconception that mindful breathing is only used to regulate difficult feelings. Actually, regardless of how we're feeling, breathing can help us to be present and really acknowledge our full experiences. There's no specific correct way to breathe, like with our hands or bodies in a specific position. We can just breathe mindfully in the same position as we normally breathe, perhaps with a little bit of a taller posture to allow for more airflow. To try a mindful breathing exercise, you'll want to get comfortable where you are. Check your posture and make sure you're sitting straight up in your torso. Then, just breathe slowly in and out. Some people like to count with their breaths, while others like to say calming phrases like in, out. To practice, breathe in slowly for about 3 seconds, thinking the word in, and exhale slowly, thinking the word out. You might replace the words in or out with words like deep and slow, calm and ease, and smile and release. Once you've done this, think about how you're feeling. How often do you really take the time to breathe, to just check in with your breath and take that pause? Can you make a commitment to taking a few breathing breaks each day? No matter what changes you'd like to make to your behavior, research shows that having a plan helps us to ensure that they actually happen. To plan, we can start by asking ourselves what's most important to change, which is different for everyone. We can identify exactly what we'd like to do, like what behavior on what times or days, and set small goals. It's important to consider barriers or things that may stand in the way, as well as opportunities, like when do you have the most uninterrupted time or the fewest barriers, and when are you most motivated. You can schedule it in by adding to an online or written calendar, an alarm on your phone, a note on your fridge, or finding a buddy to keep each other accountable. And of course, celebrate small victories. Changing our habits is no easy feat. It's important to recognize that not everyone has access to all of the strategies discussed in these videos, especially given the current state of our country. Strategies are unique to each individual and that person's goals. It's also important to keep in mind that sometimes the best strategies are simply to breathe or work on changing the way that we think. Fortunately, breathing and trying to think differently are strategies that are available to us no matter what the circumstances are. Whether we're in the middle of a stressful conversation or just lying in bed running all of the worst-case scenarios through our minds, we can breathe slowly and challenge ourselves to think differently.
We have all heard things like, just think positive, or if you can dream it, you can do it. But how much power can our thoughts really have? It might feel strange to be asked to change the way you think in order to manage your feelings, but it really works. Thought strategies are powerful tools for helping us to regulate our emotions. There's a saying in psychology, what fires together, wires together, meaning that when the same neural connections are repeatedly used, they are strengthened. If we repeatedly jump to catastrophic thoughts when something unpleasant happens, that negative way of thinking becomes automatic. And when we do this starting in early childhood, without learning helpful strategies, that way of thinking often becomes our go-to way of dealing with emotions. What's the take-home message? What you focus on grows. The good news is that the brain is plastic. It grows new pathways and is adaptable. That means we can always learn new strategies to help us regulate our emotions, that when practiced and refined become new, healthy habits. Practice is important. It strengthens the new connections, making them faster and more readily available to us, until they become our new, automatic way of thinking. A second reason thought strategies work is that they interrupt the automatic stress response. Labeling our feelings is effective because bringing language to feelings calms the activation in the limbic system. As we say, you have to name it to tame it. One of the most challenging feelings right now is a sense of loss that seems never ending. We don't know what the protests will lead to, when a vaccine will come, how paid work will resume, or when our family relationships will be restored. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss, and it is especially disruptive because it lacks a clear resolution. Instead, it seems to go on and on and on. Naming ambiguous loss, or sometimes called ambiguous grief, accurately can be the first step toward helping us move forward toward hopefulness. Sometimes people ask us if thought strategies are a kind of brainwashing, or even a kind of denial of what's really happening. Not at all. It's just a way of managing strong feelings. You know the details of your situation and what matters to you. You choose to tell yourself what you feel is right, or what works for you. So for example, for me, sometimes I say, Mark, take the high road. Mark, you can get through this. Those are the things that work for me. They may not necessarily work for you. It's also possible that you're thinking, you just don't know how badly it really is for me. It's true. No one really knows what it feels like to be in your shoes. And thought strategies do not require you to deny your experience. Even the most dire circumstances can give yourself the opportunity to choose a wiser, more helpful course of action. At the very least, you will grow your ability to tolerate uncertainty, or stay a little more comfortable with your discomfort. One beauty of thought strategies is that they can be done almost anywhere or anytime. They don't require the planning equipment or resources that some of the action-oriented strategies do. Let's look at a few kinds of thought strategies now. The first is positive self-talk. What is that? Self-talk is exactly as it sounds. It's the way we talk to ourselves. Self-talk is the dialogue you have with yourself, about yourself. The encouraging or discouraging things we say. It may be in our heads or spoken out loud. You may be aware of it or not. Self-talk is the background music of our day. So, think for a moment. How do you talk to yourself? When you look at yourself in the mirror, are you as complimentary of yourself as you would be of a friend? When you make a mistake, what's your automatic self-talk? Are you kind to yourself, or are you critical? Take a moment and write down some of your go-to phrases that you tend to say to yourself. Be honest with yourself. Share the good ones, and the not so good ones. You'll come back to these in just a few minutes. Just as we choose to rally for a sports team, we can choose to be on our own team. And one of the main ways we rally for our team is through our self-talk. Where did our self-talk come from? The quality of our self-talk often comes from what we heard about ourselves when we were a child, from our family members, teachers, and powerful adults. Perhaps you were told that you were smart, athletic, beautiful, or something else. Or perhaps you were told that you were too short, too shy, too energetic, or something else. This continues into adulthood as well. Have you been told you were a good teacher or a bad teacher, a great parent or a not so great parent, dependable or clueless, a good dancer, a terrible singer? Self-talk comes from societal norms around race, class, ability, gender, and other attributes deemed to be good, competent, worthy, or smart. A lot of what we know about ourselves comes from what others share back. How else can we truly know if a presentation was clear or a joke was funny without getting feedback? The trick is to realize where the messages are coming from and to sift through them to make sure they are supportive as opposed to harmful to your self-esteem. How do we shift to the positive? Sadly, for many of us, our self-talk can be quite harsh. Nothing like how we would actually talk to a friend, or to our students, or to our children. Negative self-talk looks like some of these harmful or discouraging judgments about ourselves. I can't believe I did that. I can't possibly do this. I'm not worthy. I'm not enough. It'll never work out. Nothing ever works out. The list goes on. Positive self-talk, though, is the encouraging thing we say to ourselves. Positive self-talk boosts the spirits, raises confidence, and perhaps helps us find the next step forward. Research suggests that positive self-talk also can help us to solve problems, think more creatively, and hopefully help us to cope with challenges, including reducing the harmful effects of stress and anxiety. Let's take a look at what some educators have shared about shifting their negative self-talk to positive self-talk. Do these sound familiar? Educator A. When I make a mistake, I say, usually out loud, but sometimes to myself, "I'm such an idiot." I never noticed it until recently, and after I did, I noticed that my mother and my own son started saying it too. That is not the type of legacy I'd like to carry out from my family tree. So I've challenged us all to shift to a new self-talk. Everyone makes mistakes. What can I learn from this and do differently next time? Educator B. When I'm dealing with a student with challenging needs, I sometimes find myself saying, I can't help this child. The need is too great. Instead, I could ask, what can I do in this moment to make this child feel safe and cared for at school? What can I control in this child's life to support them? Educator C. Lately, I hear myself saying, I'm overwhelmed and can't give enough to my job or to my family. But now I'm trying to remind myself, I'm a great educator, parent, and partner. I'm doing the best I can, and many people value and appreciate me. Educator D. I can get really frustrated or overwhelmed, and then I'll say things like, I'm never going to be able to complete this task. I'm being pulled in way too many directions. What can I tell myself instead is, I can do this, one task at a time. Prioritize what's most important. Do your best, forget the rest. Here are some positive self-talk phrases that people have used. I'm taking one step at a time. It's okay to feel this way. I may not know the answer now, but I trust it will become clear to me eventually. When I feel like I'm spinning, I can say a gentle stop to myself. I can look at the facts to make my next best decision. I'm being the best mom, friend, son, daughter, sister, brother that I can be right now. I made a mistake. I can and will go back and repair this. I'm deserving of respect. Let's return to those self-talk phrases you wrote down a few minutes ago. Are you talking to yourself like a kind and supportive friend would? If not, what could you say instead to be a more compassionate and encouraging friend to yourself? Research shows that it can be helpful to put your name in the phrase with your positive self-talk. For example, you could say, Hakeem, take the high road, or Alessandra, you can do this. Doing this helps you to have empathy for yourself. What other positive self-talk statements would you like to work on to add to your repertoire of automatic responses? Pick one or two positive statements that you can commit to practicing. Now we're going to turn to a second cognitive strategy. It's called positive reframing. Turn your wounds into wisdom. Oprah Winfrey. Reframing is putting a different spin on things. It's looking at things from another perspective, or through a different, kinder, and more helpful lens. What are the stories you tell yourself about how your life is unfolding, or about what's happening around you? How do you look at obstacles, challenges, or even the good times? How we view things affects the way we feel and what actions we're able to take. Positive reframing is when we choose to look at a situation from a different angle, see the silver lining, notice the good, reflect on a lesson learned, or have gratitude for what did go right, or what we already have. Research during the COVID-19 pandemic showed that when educators use positive reframing, they experience less burnout and have greater job satisfaction. In fact, using this strategy over time can contribute to resilience and enhanced psychological functioning. Again, when we reframe, we're not denying or sugarcoating what's happening. We're acknowledging our feelings and then widening our perspective. By bringing in another view and seeing things in a different light, we bring our activation levels down and we have more information from which to make a good decision. Take a look at some of the negative versus reframe statements we've heard recently from educators in the field. Instead of this, of course my husband lost his job. Nothing ever goes right for us. Try this. This is scary, but we still have our health and each other. We're going to get through this. Instead of this, everything's out of control right now. There's nothing I can do. Try this. A lot is outside of my control, but I do have control over the choices I make. Instead of this, I feel disconnected from my spouse. Try this. Quarantine is such an unusual situation. It's not fair to draw such conclusions right now. Instead of this, how can I tell parents that it'll be okay in the classroom when I don't even believe it? Try this. Honesty and safety are both really important. I will explain everything we're doing to keep our students emotionally and physically safe. Instead of this, I have so much to do, I'm completely overwhelmed, I'm never going to get anything finished. Try this. Let me review what I have accomplished today. Do you notice a difference in how these statements would make you feel? Even in the way I read them. Though it's not always easy to shift our thoughts, we do have a choice. We can choose to see challenges as a slippery slope toward the abyss, or as opportunities to learn and do better next time. There are myriad ways to positively reframe difficult circumstances. Here are just a few more approaches to reframing that you might find helpful. Humor. Sometimes when all feels hopeless, seeing the irony, the humor, or the ludicrousness of an impasse can give you and everyone around you a momentary break. It injects a laugh and it lets you restart once again, this time with a little lift. Try it. Enlarge the perspective. Seeing what else could be in your frame of view, or taking a long view of time, can give you a new perspective, including recalling our elders and our ancestors. To forget one's ancestors is to be a brook without a source, a tree without a root. That's a Chinese proverb. Many cultures hold their long-gone ancestors in high esteem and even call on them for support. Sometimes it can just be helpful to remember that they, or other people throughout history, surmounted enormous challenges too. This can help us believe that survival is possible and that it can bolster our resolve to bring our best self forward. To conclude this section, positive reframing is a tool that we can use to change our feelings by shifting the way we see things. It's a creative process. We can flip the script. It's not always easy, but with practice, this positive reframing can become a great habit.
Have you ever had the experience of your body being in one place while your mind is somewhere else? Maybe you're physically in the classroom, but your thoughts drift back to an unsettling conversation you've had with a friend or family member. Or maybe your mind is spinning because of everything on your to-do list. Or you might feel unsettled due to an altercation that happened between two students. You're so caught up in your head that you have a hard time being truly present with the kids. This is really common. We've all experienced it. What we know from decades of research is that practicing mindfulness can help. Mindfulness consists of two core practices: cultivating present-centered attention and cultivating open, non-judgmental awareness. We cultivate present-centered attention by concentrating on the breath or the body. When our minds wander, we gently bring back our attention to the breath or body. We do this again and again like training a puppy. Over time, this practice strengthens our ability to become focused in the present moment, no matter where we are, in the classroom or at home. In the second core mindfulness practice, we cultivate open, non-judgmental awareness by observing the whole picture, just as it is, without trying to change it. The whole picture includes both our experiences in the moment and our thoughts and feelings about it. This might include unpleasant or depleting experiences, as well as energizing and pleasant ones. Open, non-judgmental awareness helps us see how we're relating to whatever is coming up, and it helps us uncover the attitude in our minds. With open, non-judgmental awareness, we're curious, and we try to see each thought and emotion as a small wave in the ocean, rather than being swept away by a tidal wave. Woven together as complementary mindfulness practices, present-centered attention and open, non-judgmental awareness can foster clarity and resilience, and help us engage more effectively in the moment. Now, let's return to that busy classroom, but imagine that this time you've been practicing mindfulness outside of the classroom. Your mind may begin to dart around with everything you need to remember, or feel reactive to whatever your students are doing. But on this day, you pause and check in with yourself. You notice your mind's habitual reactive response, and with greater self-compassion and awareness, you lightly guide your attention back so that your mind and your body are in the same place. Then, you consider what is best for you and those around you, and in this stable state of clarity, you respond.
No matter what emotion education we receive growing up, it's important to be aware that we carry those messages with us. That's why it's important to continue our emotion education by treating our own and others' emotions scientifically. Just as scientists rely on facts and are curious, inquisitive, and analytical, educators and school staff who are emotion scientists seek to understand and observe without judgment. Emotion scientists use active listening to obtain information by asking others how they're feeling and by paying careful attention to others' words, expressions, and actions. They think long and hard about their own emotions too, always seeking to better understand their own emotional lives. Emotion scientists evaluate different ways of handling their emotions through trial and error, and strive to discover helpful ways to deal with their own emotions. Emotion scientists also recognize and attempt to undo their own judgmental tendencies. They refrain from quick assumptions or telling others how they feel. They question the source of their own thoughts and opinions about other people's emotions. And they are willing to be proven wrong with evidence. They're open to changing their beliefs and opinions based on data. So here is the big question. Are you an emotion scientist, or are you an emotion judge? Or maybe you're an emotion scientist sometimes and an emotion judge at others. For instance, some people say they're an emotion scientist with their acquaintances, but judges with the people they care about and love the most. Think about it. Imagine the following scenario. You're handing back graded quizzes when a student with poor grades crumples theirs up, knocks over their desk, stomps out of the classroom, and slams the door. You go out in the hallway to de-escalate the student. What do you do first? Take a minute and consider what you would say. Perhaps you offer a strategy for calming down, taking a walk, getting a drink, deep breaths. Perhaps you told the student the behavior was unacceptable and sent them to the office. Perhaps you approached with a question, "Why are you angry?" or "What made you so angry?" These aren't bad attempts, but let's back up. Do you know that the child is angry? Can you be sure that that is the correct feeling? The answer should be no, not yet. A child who feels their grade was unfair might be angry, but a child who feels frustrated that they're not good at math may have responded with the same behavior. So could have a fearful child who will be punished severely by their parents when they bring home a bad grade, or a child whose bully saw their grade and feels humiliated. Suddenly, your hastily offered strategy is highly disconnected. Taking a walk to calm down is not enough for the child who is fearful of retribution. Asking children why they are mad when they're not might influence their emotion education, potentially in a harmful way. There's a phrase that can help when trying to be more scientific with emotions. Behavior does not equal emotion. Yelling does not mean someone is angry. Crying does not mean someone is sad. Laughter does not mean someone is happy. The same behavior construed as anger or sadness could be an expression of passion about a cause, frustration over a blocked goal, or disappointment over unmet expectations. And sometimes we laugh when we're nervous or scared. As emotion scientists, we seek to find out the story behind the behavior in order to find the emotion underlying the behavior. We're curious. We want to really see and understand. And seeking to find out the story means digging deep. It means that we get to know our students, our colleagues, and others around us for who they are. We pay attention to their unique personalities, experiences, upbringings, identities, and cultures. And we meet them where they are and respond accordingly. We are culturally responsive. It's not always easy. In many ways, we are hardwired to make quick judgments based on the first thing we see, how others react, and what others have told us. Our brains and impulses often automatically and unconsciously rely on quick judgments. In particular, judgments that those who are different or unfamiliar are bad or scary. It may have been helpful for our ancient ancestors to use these quick judgments to know when they and their families were safe versus in trouble, if they were surrounded by friends or foes. But in our modern world, these mental shortcuts and biases can lead us astray. Fortunately, we are also hardwired for cooperation and fairness, and we can retrain our brains, override unhelpful impulses, and overcome fear and biases. To do this, we must be aware of the roadblocks to both approaching our emotions scientifically and to responding to the unique needs of those around us. One of the most common barriers to being a culturally responsive emotion scientist is that we often see others' emotions as a reflection of our own emotions. We are biased by what we have felt and experienced, and we make judgments based on these biases. We think, I felt frustrated when that happened, so that person must feel frustrated too. Or, when I act that way, it's because I'm feeling overwhelmed, so she must be feeling overwhelmed as well. Assumptions in any arena can be harmful, but it can be especially problematic when we assume we understand the emotions of people from backgrounds, races, and cultures that are different from our own. As we learned previously, behavior does not equal emotion, and without asking someone how they feel, there's a lot of room for a misperception. Research shows we are less accurate in reading emotions of people who look different from us than in people who are similar to us. Being an emotion scientist means pausing and acknowledging our limitations and often narrow views and questioning our assumptions about the way someone is feeling. Do I know for certain that this child is feeling angry? How do I know? What else might they be feeling? Another common bias is ethnocentrism. It's a fancy term for our way is the right way. We often evaluate the behavior of people with cultural backgrounds different from our own based on our own cultures, standards, and customs. In fact, research shows that we automatically and unconsciously tend to favor people who are similar to us in ethnicity, but also in age, religion, and political affiliation. Interestingly, studies have even shown that people show strong preferences toward others who share their birthday, wear a sports jersey of a team they like, or even subtly resemble themselves, especially if the resemblance relates to their own race or ethnicity. This bias may lead us to believe that our way, what we have learned and are accustomed to seeing and doing, is the right way and the better way. It's these beliefs that have contributed to structural and systemic racism and prejudices toward groups of people with different abilities, ages, religious and political affiliations, gender identities, and sexual orientations. Other biases relate to how we explain our own and others' behavior. One such bias is the fundamental attribution error. This is the tendency for people to over-attribute someone's behavior to that person's personality or characteristic rather than particular circumstances, but do the opposite for themselves. For instance, we may assume someone expresses emotions a certain way because that is a function of that person's race, age, gender identity, or some other variable. But when we express our own feelings a certain way, we attribute it to the situation and not our personality or character. The most common example of this phenomenon is people seeing something bad happen to someone else. About 65% of the time, observers blame the person's behavior or personality for the unfortunate incident. Fortunately, more and more research is showing that we can combat both our biases and our related behavior with a few simple methods. Doing the personal work to enhance your skill at perceiving emotions, learning more about others' cultures, and getting to know others well, especially those who have different backgrounds than us.
I'm Mahzareen Banaji. I'm an experimental psychologist. I teach at Harvard University. I've been fascinated by two things. We call them attitudes and we call them beliefs. These are thoughts and feelings that are in our minds. We can't see them, we can't touch them. So how to go about measuring them is the interesting question. And for more than 100 years, psychologists have been at this task of trying to understand, trying to get out of people what their thoughts and feelings are. These particular thoughts and feelings that I'm interested in are attitudes and beliefs that we hold about social groups, okay? And how we use those beliefs that we have about the group as a whole. You know, the Swiss are like this, or the Germans are like that. How do we use those beliefs in then our judgments about individual people who happen to be members of the group? Okay? So that's the interesting question. And as I said, for over 100 years, people have been measuring them in the form of attitudes or prejudices that we might hold, thoughts or beliefs or stereotypes that we may have about different groups of people. How to go about doing this is the question. And we know one easy way to do it, and that is to ask people, what do you think about X? How likely is it that people from this group will be able to do something of this kind or that kind? What is their inner nature? Are they competitive? Are they collaborative? Are they smart? Are they not very smart? Are they trustworthy? Are they not trustworthy? Things like that. And so we would just ask. But then asking has some problems, right? There are two problems with asking people. First of all, if you ask me what I think about X, I may not want to tell you about that because that's a private belief and I don't want to share it with you. But there is a second problem with asking, and that is the one I'm most interested in. And that is that we may not know our own minds. You see, our brains do a lot of work silently, quietly. We don't have access to all of it. And we don't necessarily have access to the contents of our mind. We don't know, this may seem strange to you, but we don't know what our actual attitudes might be or what our thoughts and beliefs are. So as scientists, our job is to try to figure out indirect ways into people's minds to draw out what might actually exist there that even they may not know. So the work that I have been doing for the last, close to 40 years now, is work on trying to get at the implicit or the unconscious or the less visible, even to ourselves, contents of our minds. We've developed tests like the IAT or the implicit association test, which we use to bypass, to get away from asking people what they might think or feel, and instead just trying to see what might be in their minds. So we might look, for example, at how rapidly or how quickly or how accurately you can put two things together. And the test will reveal, in a sense, what it is that might be sitting in your mind that you may not know about. So I'll give you an example just with me. I am a woman. I have worked outside the home all my life. And yet, when I take a test that requires me to associate female with career and male with home, I can't seem to do that as well as if you gave me the opposite. If you ask me to associate female with home and male with career, that turns out to be relatively easy for my brain to do. Why? I don't have this belief that women don't belong in the workplace or anything like that. And yet, my brain contains the thumbprint of the culture in which I live. And that culture has repeatedly associated female and home more so than male and home, and that's now in my head. That's the important discovery, that we can say consciously, we can say explicitly what we think and feel. That's one way in which our minds work, but there is another part of our mind where these associations that are picked up, sucked out of the culture and sit there, they're there all the time. Where do they come from? One of the things that we've been very interested in is looking at young children. How do young children come to have the beliefs and attitudes that they do? Do they learn it slowly as they grow up and so on? And our data suggests no, that children are very open to what's going on in their culture. And at a very early age, at ages like 2 and 3, we can see evidence that they have in their minds attitudes and stereotypes of the sort we see in adults. So what we now know is that these are picked up pretty quickly, and that they exist in the minds of children even at that age. But they're not always visible, but we can see them in things like conversations. So a student of mine, Tessa Charlesworth, has recently been analyzing data from parents and children. These are conversations that parents and children have had, and there are thousands of such conversations. And we can use an approach called natural language processing. We can use machine learning to look at whether in the language that parents are using, they actually are relying on these stereotypes that they have no clue that they are. When you ask parents, they'll tell you, I don't know where my child picked this up from because I certainly don't teach it to them. And yet when we analyze these conversations that parents and children have had, we can see in those conversations evidence that parents are indeed associating, for example, female more with home things and male more with career things.
Because there's a way in which, a lot of what we're doing in the everyday domain is invisible. So we think it's magic, but actually I think it might just be things that we take for granted, or tacit knowledge, or simple everyday things that humans just, in fact, can't help but do. Like, we all know how to listen in some functional way. We don't necessarily know how to listen to each other deeply, or to listen as a kind of leadership responsibility, or to listen from a perspective you cannot take yourself. So you and I think, wear different racial identities, think of ourselves in somewhat different ways. It can be pretty hard to understand the experience of someone who has a different demographic identity than you do. So one of the things that happened over the summer, and this is my way of answering some of the questions in the chat, is that there were companies that were, and individuals who were kind of caught on their heels, sort of saying, why are we so surprised by what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor? Why are we so surprised? Why are we not more prepared? In some ways, for those of us who are old enough, the kind of conversations around Ferguson weren't really that long ago. So if it's the case that practice helps prepare us and maybe makes us a little bit wiser, shouldn't we be a little bit wiser? And many companies, especially, finding themselves not wiser at all, not able to react. pretty caught off guard. So part of the idea of the leadership gym is to keep you in good shape, right? So if you went to the gym during Ferguson and you didn't go to the gym since then, you're probably in pretty bad shape. And I think that's actually kind of a fair comparison. So if you talked about race 6 years ago, and then you didn't talk about it for 6 years, didn't think about it much, didn't think it was relevant, it wasn't really in the news cycle or in your organizational conversations with urgency and the kind of, it wasn't about this quarter. It didn't get your attention or the metrics or the measurement. You're probably out of shape. And when you're out of shape, it's hard to run. And we had to sprint this summer.
Yeah. And I think something that came up in the article that I want to talk about, so this is a good time, is we seem to be allergic to discomfort, to feeling discomfort in this country. And we talk a lot at the Yale Center about becoming more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And these conversations, the conversations about Black Lives Matter, about even about going back to school and what's going to happen with racial justice, racial injustice when we go back to school, they're not comfortable conversations.
No.
You cannot use, if you don't have strategies, if you haven't used the strategies in 6 years, or you never had them to begin with, well, one, now is the time to get them, and urgently, but you're not going to be able to step into that conversation because you actually don't know what you're going to do. And even if you have the courage to say what's on your mind, you get up the courage and you make a statement, you don't know what's going to come back at you. And then what? And how are you going to manage it? So I think people avoid that also because even after an encounter that might be authentic and full of curiosity and might even go, well, then there's tomorrow. And what do you do when you're in that same conversation with that same person, but it's a day later and you had to realize that you were vulnerable, and can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the good news and the bad news that there's almost always tomorrow. It's really that you are accountable for your actions. Tomorrow should be part of our context of working together, so that it's not the case that you can just say any old thing out of reactivity and then pretend the next day that it didn't happen. I mean, you can do that, but it's a certain kind of organizational culture and context that allows that, and it usually only allows it for certain demographics, both in gender and race. And so, there's usually a little bit more of a kind of punishing or a certain kind of accountability for demographics that are in the minority. They just kind of can't get away with as much stuff. Mm-hmm. So, how do we kind of build a culture that can work? So part of it, I think, is to use your term, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. You really can build familiarity with doing difficult things. We can do difficult things. We're doing difficult things right now. And many people were quite surprised how quickly we moved into work from home mode. You might have seen a company plan for this for 2 years if it had been a kind of planned transition. We can do much more difficult things, and we can adapt to circumstances that may surprise us. So if there's a kind of, silver lining to this entire period, for me, as someone who believes in the power of experiential learning, we have a kind of the perfect platform for experiential learning. We have deep opportunity now to get wiser about how we can adapt, how we can actually have conversations that we experience initially as difficult, and we, these conversations are going to keep coming back about race.
When students have strong relationships with caring adults, they are more likely to feel engaged and motivated to succeed in school. Research has shown, unfortunately, that a majority of students don't believe there is any adult in their school who is there for them, whom they can count on. As we learned in Section 5, we all have blind spots, hot buttons, and sometimes there's just not enough time and we fail to notice some of our students. Moreover, many older students are quite practiced at covering up their feelings, which can make building strong relationships difficult, despite our best efforts. So we shouldn't have the expectation that we're going to be perfect. It's more about adopting a willing mindset to keep trying and learning. After all, we're trying to build up a new kind of muscle. Let's do an activity to unpack the skill of perceiving emotions. I'm going to display a facial expression and ask you to identify the emotion I show. Ready? Here we go. Jot down the emotion you just saw in my face. What emotion was I displaying? When I do this exercise in my class, I get a range of responses, including bored, calm, annoyed, content, distracted, and even tired. Was the feeling you detected similar to any of these? Which emotion was I actually displaying? Certainly, these are all very different emotions. All right. I was actually expressing calm. So what do we learn from this activity? What are the implications for misreading others' emotions? There are many, but I think the first is that reading emotions is a lot harder than we think. Imagine how many times we might have misread a student or a colleague. Think about the implications. There are some common barriers to accurately perceiving and understanding other people's emotions. One of the biggest barriers is ourselves. Sometimes when we are full of our own thoughts and feelings, we may simply fail to notice or bring our attention to another person in a meaningful way. Or we might want to control the other person's feelings. We need the other person to feel a certain way. For example, we need our students to be calm so that we can begin the lesson. And when they aren't calm, we cast them as being difficult, or we get impatient or angry. As an authority figure in the schools, we may feel we need to stay in control, and when students appear to disobey us, it threatens our authority. Yet, if we rewind that scene and play it back, we can see that we've often jumped over the step of taking our responsibility to help our students feel calm. As adults, we're the more powerful person in the relationship. Or sometimes, when talking to someone else, our thoughts default to how we felt in a similar situation, and we inadvertently fill up the space with ourselves and take our attention off the other person. Other times, we just like some students better than others, even though we might not want to admit it. Or maybe we're more comfortable with some feelings coming from some students, but those same feelings are not okay if other students express them. We also tend to just be more comfortable with some feelings than others. We might easily feel sympathy for a sad or lonely student. But when a student is angry, our impulse may be to meet their anger with our bigger anger. Or sometimes what's happening accidentally trips an early memory of our own, like anger in the household we grew up in. When that happens, we may mentally drop out of the present moment and down into child space inside ourselves. If we haven't resolved some of our own difficult childhood issues, we can respond to the student in front of us from an unresolved, hurt, or angry place that they don't deserve. If we haven't grown up with our own experience of being comforted, we are more likely to respond to someone else's distress by becoming distressed ourselves. Psychologists call this sympathetic distress. When our students' feelings become our feelings. But if we can act with compassion toward another person and still hold on to our emotional balance, everyone benefits. Is there one particular student you haven't had time for? Take a moment to pause. Open up the space between you and the student in your imagination. Ask yourself, is there any reason preventing me from leaning into their story? Is there anything I could do differently to connect with this student? Research shows that we're better at reading the emotions of people we have spent more time around. That means the more people from different backgrounds we get to know, the more nuanced our understanding of individual differences can be, and the more accurate we can become about different people's emotions. When we encounter people with whom we feel less familiar, we are more likely to default to running those people through our brain's threat detection software. We ask ourselves, is this someone similar to me that I can approach, or someone not like me that I might need to avoid? The more different people are from us, the more we need to exert the mental effort to pause. Because feelings travel faster than thoughts, it's critical to interrupt the automatic emotional reaction and recruit the more advanced and logical prefrontal cortex region of our brain. Only then can we access our ability to take another person's perspective. Overcoming our automatic responses takes self-awareness and practice. Let's start with the self-awareness part. What are some of the differences that can be especially hard to bridge? Age. Students show their feelings differently at different ages. Let's take chronic fear, for example. Young children often regress when they're afraid over time. Their language skills might deteriorate, or they may even stop talking. They might have more tantrums, forget how to toilet train, become extra clingy, or even have nightmares. In elementary school, the fear might show up in bodily complaints, headaches, stomach aches, body aches. That's not to suggest that illnesses are psychological, but repeated symptoms could be a sign. Some children who are afraid might act out more and become aggressive, while others may withdraw more into themselves. Chronic fear also can show up as learning problems or excessive talking and questioning. Fearfulness in middle school and high school might be expressed through self-destructive and reckless behavior, excessive shame and guilt, fantasies of revenge, or sudden changes in their relationships. Since our students' fears are expressed very differently than our own, we may not recognize that the cause of what we're seeing is fear, and not just bad behavior. Any unusual behavior in students should be a cause for concern. Temperamental and personality differences. It's easy to gravitate towards students who are like us in personality. Introverts understand introverts better. Sensitive people connect with sensitivities in other people more easily. It is more important for us to stretch more, to get to know different personalities, even when, and sometimes especially when, they annoy us. We also can recognize that some of the students we label as most difficult can sometimes actually be the most sensitive. They may be the ones who benefit most from the interventions and programs we offer. Gender, culture, and power. Gender, culture, and power all work together in seamless ways to socialize our emotions. These forces might be adaptive in some circumstances, but in the long run, they also can create barriers to helping us understand the emotions of those around us. For example, white middle-class boys in many Western countries are already less emotionally expressive than girls by the time they're in preschool. Even which emotions they're allowed to express are different. Boys are allowed to express anger, contempt, and disgust, but are discouraged from more tender emotions like sadness, anxiety, and empathy. White girls, on the other hand, are encouraged to express happiness and nurturance, sympathy, and empathy, but they're socialized to suppress unpleasant emotions like sadness, fear, anxiety, shame, and guilt. As we discussed in Section 5, race also plays a role. Studies show that inside their own families, African American parents have a strong social emotional orientation. But outside their families, they socialize their children to have greater self-control and limit their emotional disclosures compared to white parents. This is rooted in a history of oppression. It's not as safe for black children to express anger or call up strong emotions in a conflict, since research studies and current events show they are punished disproportionately for expressing these emotions. These are just two examples, but differences play out in all cultures. For adults, then, it is important that we take care to refrain from judging other people's emotions. It's also critical to proceed with sensitivity if we're expecting students to be more expressive. We may be opening them up to greater risk and to their own moral distress if we blunder across a cultural line. It's important to take a lot of extra care to examine our own biases. What suppressions are we colluding in? Are we shutting down some people's feelings due to bias? Create and enforce our classrooms as safe emotional spaces. We can ask ourselves what we're doing to help all students feel safe to express their emotions. Emphasize for students that context matters. How we express our emotions will naturally vary based on where we are, who we're with, and what we're hoping to achieve in a given situation or relationship. Take a moment and reflect on your relationship with a student who is very different from you in some way. Someone you have had trouble connecting with, perhaps. First, consider what this student may be misreading or assuming about you. Struggling with accurate perception of others is a two-way street. Second, is there any possibility that you've misread the student at some point? Next, let's turn to the positive. What do you, or could you, appreciate or value about this student? What do you think are the student's unique strengths? Make as long a list as you can.
As we've learned in this section so far, a student's behavior alone doesn't give an adult enough information about how to best support them. Instead, a student's behavior can be a cue for the adult to pause, get curious, and consider what might be going on beneath the surface. This can take time. Let's take a look at how inside feelings are different from outside behavior, using stress as an example. Inside feelings of stress can show up in a lot of different ways on the outside. Remember, stress interferes with brain functioning. On the outside, a student under stress can appear to have academic problems. They may have trouble focusing, or they may not remember new material or forget assignments. Their curiosity may be shut down, or they may not explore freely. Sometimes they can even become physically sick with stomach aches or headaches. However, on the inside, the stress can actually be dampening down higher-order thinking processes in the prefrontal cortex. Attention, thinking, memory, and reasoning usually suffer when this happens. On the mood meter, their energy might be quite high, or the opposite, they could be quite inhibited, suffering from a freeze response. Or, on the outside, stress can show up in students as emotion dysregulation. They may run hot and cold. They may be reactive or withdrawn. But on the inside, they just may be overwhelmed, trying to manage feelings like chronic fear or grief. They may have trouble maintaining a steady state. People who experience emotion dysregulation usually have problems with relationships because they're volatile, on a hair trigger, and deemed as being overly sensitive. Or again, at the other extreme, they may have the freeze reaction and appear to be numb, withdrawn, rigid, and not responsive. The worst situation for a student is when they lack a reliably safe and supportive adult in their life. This is because students are wired to assess their security and safety by their connection to a steady adult figure. When that connection is absent, like when students are abused or neglected or in a chaotic situation, they're not only afraid, but they may feel badly about themselves. On the outside, this can show up as a refusal to participate in class, or, on the other hand, perfectionism. Or they might overcompensate for their low self-esteem by bragging or bullying others. On the inside, in these cases, they may feel a range of emotions from guilt to shame to helplessness. When we see behavior that seems problematic, or that seems like a change from how they normally behave, it's not a cue to ask, what's wrong with this student? but instead it's a cue to ask, what happened to this student? What is this behavior trying to tell us? This calls to mind a quote by Russell A. Barkley. Barkley said that the kids who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving of ways. To develop this skill, it's important to remember our roles as emotion scientists. As we discussed in the previous section, because students often don't express their emotions directly, we can become like curious detectives hunting for clues. It helps if we can practice, if we can gradually train ourselves to watch, learn, and wonder about what's going on inside of our students. Emotion self-regulation is the process of managing our own emotions. Emotion co-regulation is different. It refers to the ongoing process between two people where one person's emotions are continuously influenced by the actions and emotional reactions of the other person. In classrooms, this can be seen as a back and forth between the teacher and student with the goal of supporting the child's emotions. It also works between adults. Imagine that you and a colleague both hear upsetting news from your school or district leader. You both are feeling anxious. You walk up to your colleague, who appears to be more stressed than you are. You smile and offer a warm greeting. In response, her face lights up, her breathing relaxes, and she smiles back. In return, you feel calmer, and you say, "Don't worry, we'll figure this out." In this example, co-regulation is about establishing a more positive state of mind between you and the other person. How does this work? In the case of co-regulating with a child, just the presence of a caring adult can actually lower the levels of the stress hormone cortisol in the child. For this reason, a child can handle stress much better if they're with a person that makes them feel safe and secure. This person might be a parent, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, or another relative. When adults support each other, or an adult supports a child, the stress hormone cortisol can decline during that moment of co-regulation. Also, the soothing hormone, oxytocin, and feel-good neurotransmitter, dopamine, can increase, all promoting feelings of well-being throughout the brain and body. Our well-being depends a lot on our relationships, and the feelings that we're not alone, that our burdens are seen and shared, improve our ability to cope. Co-regulation doesn't only apply to interactions between two people. Whole groups of people can be influenced too. For example, a principal might try to shift the feelings of her entire staff to be more enthusiastic and motivated about going back to school, despite fears related to COVID-19. Or, a teacher may influence the emotions of students in her class because she wants to transition them from the high energy of recess to a lower energy required to focus on math. Some adults try to command students to settle down, but that's really not co-regulation. A teacher who co-regulates with her students actually helps them to settle. For example, by speaking in friendly but slightly softer and slower tones, acknowledging their feelings and energy, and moving to a brief mindfulness exercise or checking in with their feelings before turning to the subject. Why is it important to know about co-regulation? Humans are social creatures. We're always influencing each other's feelings, whether we realize it or not. To be able to do that with conscious awareness, intention, and skill is to wake up to a positive power, as well as to our responsibility to help others, especially those we love and care for. The first step to managing stressful moments is managing your own emotions. Think about that moment when you notice an upset student in your classroom, whether it's in person or virtually. At the very same time that you notice their emotions, you're also experiencing your own emotions. This is where we can pause and check in with ourselves first. This is an emotional crossroads, where identifying and regulating our own emotions will make the difference between a wise or an impulsive course of action. Here's why regulating our own emotions first is important. It keeps our own stress levels low, away from our own fight, flight, or freeze response. It signals to our students that we're safe and available. It keeps our brain's access to our prefrontal cortex, our higher, better, clearer thinking, available to us. And our self-regulation in the heat of the moment is an important role modeling opportunity for everyone. Consider the different strategies you've discovered throughout this course that might work for you to feel at ease and calm. Perhaps you're using positive self-talk and saying to yourself something like, "I've got this. I'm a calming force here. It's going to be okay. I've been here before." Can you think of one or two self-calming phrases that might work for you? Or maybe shifting your perspective would be helpful. As we've learned in a previous section, instead of thinking, "What's wrong with this student?" you may reframe to, "What's happened to this student?" Or "What are they going through?" Or "What is this student's behavior trying to tell me?" Remember that you can always think of a few self-calming phrases that help you reframe the situation and approach it from the ideal state of mind. Step 2 is helping the student with their emotions. After managing our own emotions, we then can turn our attention to supporting our students to help them manage their own emotions. But students don't always know how to talk about their feelings right away. So we can think of this step as having two parts. First, settling the activation in their body and brain so they can move out of fight, flight, or freeze. And second, connecting with their feelings. Let's look at each of these. The first part of this step is settling the high energy or activation level. None of us can think or act wisely in the heat of the moment, especially children. That means for most children, nothing we do or say will take hold until the child's activation is lowered. Here are some ideas that you might find helpful to assist them in calming the jolt in their bodies or soothing their flood of tears. And since you know your students best, you may have other ideas too. These are just some general suggestions. Sometimes it's enough to just sit next to them or be present in a virtual room and wait quietly. Be patient. If you feel your impatience rising, focus on your own breathing. You may imagine every exhale sending positive energy. Offer a walk, a cool glass of water, or a reminder to breathe. These physical movements help calm the stress response by clearing the cortisol, but we understand that you might not always be in person in these times. Depending on the situation, consider some helpful phrases, like "You're safe here," "Take your time," "I'm here for you," "Something's really got to you, huh? We'll figure this out." If they're very stressed, ensuring their sense of safety and security is critical, and further processing can come at a later time. The second part is to explore the story and the feelings behind that story. Remember, our mindsets as emotion scientists mean that we are non-judgmental, curious, and open-minded. Our voice and body language can reflect this. Remember, the goal here is to understand their perspective and help give voice to their feelings. Since some students have trouble naming their feelings, again, we can start with the story. Gently unspool their version of the events. Prompts like, "I noticed," "You don't seem like yourself," "Can you tell me what happened?" "I'd like to know," and "Then what happened?" can help. Once you understand your student's story around the feeling, gently shift the focus to help them name the feelings. Sometimes identifying feelings happens simultaneously with getting the story, or it may go back and forth. Remember, we can't always gauge from a child's behavior how they feel on the inside. Give them permission to have their feelings and let them know that anything they feel is okay. Having all feelings is okay. Deciding which ones to act upon comes later. It's always important to strive for accuracy of feeling words. Helping students build their emotional vocabulary is a great gift that you can give them. Not only does it support their ability to communicate, but it also makes it more likely that their real needs will be seen, heard, and met. Remember to check in with your assumptions about how the child may be feeling. Try to suspend your own ideas. Listen to understand their feelings and what might be causing them. Step 3 is brainstorming and strategizing. Here, you don't need to provide an answer, but you can act as a supportive coach. Our students are brilliant and creative. Given a little time, space, and confidence, they often come up with solutions we wouldn't have thought of. It's important to listen to their ideas first and help them along. Sometimes next steps are small, like thinking about the situation from a different perspective. Sometimes next steps are big, like initiating a difficult conversation with a friend or a coach. And sometimes, as in the case with grief, it's helpful to be with other people to talk about it. When a student has lost a loved one, they simply need your quiet permission to sit with their grief. Here are some prompts to help get the problem solving going. Remember to include strategies for dealing with the emotion as well as with the situation itself. You might ask, what are some ideas that you have about how you can deal with this? I wonder what you could do next. I know how thoughtful and creative you are, and I wonder what you think is best. What would you advise your best friend to do in this situation if she was feeling how you feel? Of course, you may have some suggestions too. Asking the student if they would like your suggestion conveys that you trust their judgment. For example, can I help you think about what your next step might be? I like all of your ideas. Would you like to brainstorm some more together? Then you can choose. Is there anything I can do? Would you like me to offer some ideas? These conversations aren't necessarily linear. Sometimes the student just needs to be heard and seen and isn't ready or interested in next steps. Sometimes the conversation weaves back and forth between self-regulation, naming feelings, and next steps until we finally land on a direction that feels right. Step 4 is closing the conversation. Closing the conversation well leaves the student in a manageable and hopeful place. Try to end on a positive or constructive note. Maybe you identify what's enough for now and what you'll revisit later. You can share your trust in their ability and remind them that no feeling is final or forever. There will be other feelings too. It can help to reiterate the next step that you and the student landed on. Let them know that you'll follow up with them later. For example, thanks for sharing your story and for allowing me to help you strategize. I'm really glad we had time together. Trust your judgment about this. You made a clear decision. It's okay if your next step isn't perfect. You can learn from that too. I'll be there for you. Just let me know when you want to talk again. The final step, step 5, is following up. Adults and students alike are sensitive to what follows a critical conversation. And few problems are solved in one conversation. There may be others, layer after layer, that emerge as time passes. So be sure to discreetly check back in at a later time. You might say things like, how did it go? How are you feeling? What's your next step? Reinforce their strengths and their growth mindset when you follow up. Let them know that sometimes the strategies they've chosen won't work, but that doesn't mean they aren't helpful at other times. Offer a reminder of your availability to support them. The important thing, besides the student's feelings, is their belief that they have a grown-up who cares in their life. Co-regulation is not a linear process. You may go back and forth between managing your own feelings and helping the student become more skilled at identifying and managing their own. Some feelings are resolved quickly, others must be endured and put in perspective. But again, as we mentioned earlier, humans are social creatures, and your compassionate support will go a long way toward helping. To conclude this section, let's consider this quote. Helping one person may not change the world, but it could change the world for one person.
Each quadrant of the mood meter is associated with different kinds of thinking and learning activities. When students are in the yellow, they may experience emotions that promote creative thinking and the generation of new ideas. Brainstorming, energetic group activities, and creative problem solving are best done in the yellow. When students are in the red, they may experience emotions that heighten awareness and keep students on their toes. The red is good for competitive activities, like debating, or passionate expression, like promoting a cause. When students are in the blue, they may experience emotions that help them focus for deductive reasoning and critical thinking. In addition, the blue emotions prime students to relate well to others' misfortune, building empathy. The blue promotes success for tasks like proofreading, editing, and detailed analysis. When students are in the green, they may experience emotions that promote self-reflection and consensus building. Students feel comfortable, relaxed, and calm. Activities that involve collaboration are ideal for the green. The best teachers differentiate instruction using the mood meter and capitalize on all quadrants, knowing that all emotions matter.
So how do you run a school?
Yeah, right.
How do you run a school?
Exactly.
I mean, you
Yeah,
got to lead. You got to lead in these crazy, uncertain,
we gotta.
times.
Yeah, we gotta. So what we've been doing
So
is
what
talking
are you doing?
about, yeah, we are talking about how we're in this together. And school is not a place. It is us. We are the school. So wherever we are, we're going to create that school environment. We're going to create that culture of care, whether it's remotely, whether it's in person. And we are a village. We always say that we are a village. We're working together. That connectedness is the only way that we're going to make it through this, because we're all experiencing the same thing. We need to be prepared. We got to prepare ourselves for everything. And then we have to work together and attend to our feelings and our self-care. That's how we've been doing it.
All right, thank you. And Karen, so, of all the things that you've seen, like specifically in terms of all these districts that are reopening or not reopening in whatever way they are, any takeaways or any thoughts about, like, is there a district or a best practices that you've seen where you're like, oh, these people like get SEL?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of places to point, a lot of success stories, but I will say sometimes the hardest thing is the easiest answer. And that is, we know that if you're to mitigate stress, strong relationships matter. And helping to really create and prioritize time and structures, not only to say it's okay, but to embed the intentional opportunities and efforts for teachers to connect, for kids to connect, for teachers and kids to connect. Those relationships are what will get us through these stressful moments. And, we can use all kinds of fancy labels and, sort of edu-speak about it, but it really does come down to schools that are prioritizing relationships are doing, and I think most likely to be the most successful in this moment.
Thank you.
Ruler makes our school a better place.
I feel that Ruler has helped me because I'm able to show who I really am.
I think after having Ruler come in, I've grown so confident and just like what I've always seen myself to be.
Ruler asserts that all emotions matter. All emotions. It's the full range of emotions that makes us human, and it's the full range of emotions that helps us to get through life. Ruler is a systemic approach to social and emotional learning. We want to give school districts the opportunity to build a common language for social and emotional learning.
You need a feeling, or else you can't cooperate, you can't communicate, and you can't really do anything. If you were mad, you can't talk about being mad and be calmer.
Too many kids are holding it all in, and we're seeing a rise in anxiety and stress in children that doesn't need to be there.
They're really thinking about cyberbullying and body shaming as opposed to academics.
If we are all working together on our social emotional language, we are making the school a safer, more caring, and joyful place to be for all children.
When I come into school, everybody's just so welcome, and I feel like I can trust everybody and let them know what's going on, and they'll be supportive back.
Research shows that kids who go through this kind of training are less stressed. They do have less depression.
Going back and looking at my emotions and being what am I feeling right now, and how can I regulate this? I think that's a really good thing to be teaching people.
Students are having better conversations with each other. Discipline incidents have decreased. Students are able to be more creative. It really supports the development of the whole child in every way.
So try to empathize with the other character as well. How do you think the other person felt? And how did the other person show and handle their feelings?
Ruler is a set of 5 key skills that are the underlying skills of emotional intelligence. Recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions. We use a set of anchor tools. Tools to help people build greater self-awareness, to build a better emotional vocabulary.
The tools have helped make our students more aware of their classmates.
We're trying to give everyone the opportunity to become more emotionally skilled.
We built a school-wide charter together. The whole school did it together.
The most important thing about the charter is you could see how everyone else wants to feel.
On our charter, some of the words we came up with were relaxed, comfortable, happy, excited.
We were able to relate to our classmates more because we realized they were feeling the same things as we were.
Signing the charter united the school. We're making this decision to be positive towards each other, to be nice.
In classrooms, we've seen students use the mood meter to check in and to regulate how they are feeling.
If you go left to right, that's your pleasantness. And then when you go up and down, that's how much energy you have.
The yellow means your energy's high. The green means you're kind of calm. The blue means when you're sad, you're glum, you're lonely. And the red means when you're like angry, you're not focused.
Where are you on the mood meter?
I think I'm on the green.
Bluish, greenish.
A mix between the green and yellow.
I'm on the yellow because today's a new day.
To me, the meta moment is that tool that can be applied anywhere and immediately.
The meta moment is important because it helps me to stay focused on my work.
Students are using tools like the meta moment so that they can avoid some of those situations that might escalate into something else.
And now that I know about the meta moment, I could take a deep breath and sit down and it could help.
A key element of the meta moment is pausing and activating what we call our best selves.
My best self is me following my goals for the term.
I am helpful to others, peaceful, happy, and relaxed.
The blueprint. It's been very helpful with students that are having an ongoing conflict.
Someone will come down in the red, mad. If you say to them, well, what happened? They'll just still be mad talking about it. So we'll give them the blueprint and have them just work on it. What happened? How are you feeling? How is the other person feeling?
You have to understand what people are thinking and going through, so you would have to like put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I think she felt like she was excluded and that she was left out.
When we started doing these activities, it helped push me and it boosted up my confidence and it made me feel like I was important.
Ruler begins by training the adults in schools to shift their mindsets around the value and importance of emotions.
We spent a year working with staff, just teaching them the ruler skills and the anchor tools and using it in everything we did with each other.
Because educators, like kids, come from many different places. And so really getting them to take a look and reflect upon their own practices. What are they doing and how do they resolve the issues that they are feeling within?
We really are investing in making sure that all of the adults are all embracing this approach so that every student can be successful.
With this, you're going to be able to teach.
Our feeling word for today, boys and girls, is focus.
They're going to be able to receive what you're teaching. The kids are going to be able to learn.
We also work with families because we want children and their parents or caretakers to have the same language.
It's not just the schoolhouse. It's what's going on at sporting events, what's going on at home. When you're sitting around watching the evening news, how are you reacting to the news when your son or daughter is sitting next to you? You need to be aware how your emotion can influence them. There's no doubt that the ruler approach allows for enhanced learning.
I learn best when I feel happy and focused.
I think it's really like a life skill that they're giving us here.
We've seen through research and experiences that creating and cultivating supportive, inclusive environments are critical and foundational to the success of every student.
This is an embodiment of a whole philosophy of being, and I think it's one in this world today that we need.
This is an approach that is for everyone. It helps everyone learn strategies to help them manage their lives so they can be healthier, happier, and more effective. My real hope is that every school would embed these principles into the way leaders lead, teachers teach, and students learn. At the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, it has been our pleasure to offer this course to staff working in schools and other educational organizations. I'll use this video as my last opportunity to ask you that simple but profound question. How are you feeling? In spite of the emotional whirlwind so many of us have endured this past year, I hope this course has provided you with strategies to both seek and hold on to emotions like gratitude and peace and joy. I also hope you have found ways to manage your unpleasant emotions and help students manage theirs. Remember, building our social and emotional skills is a lifelong journey, and we are all in this together, doing the best we can each day to support ourselves and each other, and learning all along the way. My other hope is that this course has empowered you to continue the work we started in these 10 short hours. And my hope is that you'll find ways to make SEL a permanent part of your school. Thank you for your daily investments in supporting the lives of children today and the children in future generations. Let's work together now to create the emotion revolution we all need so badly in our schools by both acknowledging and leveraging the power of emotions to achieve greater well-being and success. Thank you all very much, and best wishes.